Chapter 2 Blue Rose Part 1 Lower Fire Month, 9th Month, Day 3, 8:02. White full-plate armor and a sword fastened to his waist. His equipment in perfect condition, Climb stepped into Valencia Palace. Valencia Palace was divided largely into three main buildings. The one Climb made his way into was the largest, and where the royal family resided. Different from where he had been moments ago, the place was designed to let in as much light as possible, making it blindingly bright. He walked down a wide hallway that was scrubbed so clean, not even a trace of dust could be found, let alone any litter. His full-plate armor did not make any noise, the reason being that it was tempered with mithril and orichalcum and enchanted with magic. The palace guards, knights, also wearing full-plate armor, were standing at attention in the wide and clean hallway. The Empire's knights referred to the common folk who were part of the standing army. On the other hand, the knights of the kingdom were those who were granted a title of nobility. As an example, there were numerous occasions where the third son of a noble household would become a knight, since he would be unable to inherit his household. However, since the kingdom paid the knights handsomely, they only accepted those who were skilled with the sword. It was impossible to become one with only connections, even if one was a noble. The most fitting way to call them would be the king's elite guards. Coincidentally, warrior captain was a newly fashioned title for Gazef, since there was much opposition to granting him a knighthood. Climb lightly greeted those same knights. As expected, only a few greeted him in response, but some did respond and even greeted him with sincerity. While they were nobles, these people swore their service to the king and carried a warrior's heart. Their loyalty unforgotten, they carried great respect for those with skill. On the other hand, among the people Climb passed in the hallway, there were those whose hatred was obvious at a glance. They were the maids. Most of them showed a bitter face whenever they saw Climb. The maids who worked in the palace were different from normal maids in that they were the daughters of noble houses who came to gain experience at court. In a way, the maids held a higher position than Climb, especially the ones who worked close to the royal family. Most of them were daughters of high-ranking nobility. Their displeasure at the fact that they had to lower their heads to a man who was less than a commoner showed itself as anger. In terms of rank, it was true that Climb was beneath them. They probably wished to show their distaste while Renaer was not around. Having thought as much, Climb did not show any anger over their behavior. But what Climb failed to realize was that his thinking spawned a vicious cycle where the maids would misunderstand his expressionless face as him ignoring them, infuriating them further. On the other hand, if he was the type who could notice such things, then perhaps everything else would have been handled much more smoothly. It was also true for Climb that every time he was in the palace, his nerves would wear away slightly. Although it went without saying, Renaer and Ramposa III were not the only people living in this palace. Ugh! Speak of the devil, Climb moved to the side of the hallway, straightened his back, and stood at attention with his hand over his chest. Two people were approaching. The one following from behind was a tall, thin man with blonde hair brushed behind his head. Marquis Raven, head of one of the great 6 noble families in the kingdom. The problem was the short, fat man walking in front of him. His name was Zanak Valuren Iyana Rael Vyself, the second prince and second in line for the throne. Zanak stopped his feet, his chubby face turning into a frown.
"Why, Climb, are you on your way to show your face to that monster?"
There was only one person Prince Zanak would call a monster. Although he knew it was insolent, Climb could not let that stand.
"Your Highness, I'm grateful for your words, but Lady Renaer is not a monster. She is kind and beautiful. Some even call her the kingdom's treasure."
What else could you call someone who got rid of the slave trade and proposed many policies in order to help the citizens? although the number of them that saw the light of day was small because of the checks in place by the nobles, Clyme knew better than anyone else how much she cared for the people. Every time a policy that would otherwise help the common folk was shot down for a foolish reason, like the nobles trying to save face, the kind-hearted girl would shed tears in front of him. This man, Zanak, who did not even lift a finger, had no right to say anything. He was consumed by the desire to shout, to bring down his fist. Even if they were only half-siblings, these weren't words that should be said about someone who shared the same blood. However, he could not allow his anger to show. Renaer had said this:
"My elder brother will try to anger you so he can hold you in contempt. He's most likely looking for an excuse to separate us, Clyme. Never let him see you weak."
That sad expression, his master, who was not accepted even by her own family, Clyme remembered the day when he swore that at least he would never betray her.
"But I wasn't referring specifically to Renaer, though. That must just be what you really think. Well, let's stop stating the obvious. But treasure, was it? Is she really proposing her ideas, thinking they would work? It looks to me like she already knows that they won't, but still acts on them."
There was no way that was true. Just how could it be? It was the ugly envy of a man who could only think in those terms. "I do not think that is the case."
As expected, it seems you don't see her as a monster. Is it because you're blind? Or perhaps she's being clever? Shouldn't I be suspicious?
"Not at all. I firmly believe that Lady Renaer is the kingdom's treasure." Because he was the one who watched her the closest, he was assured that everything she did was righteous.
"Really? That's interesting. Then can you deliver a message to that monster for me? Although your brother only thinks of you as a political tool, if you cooperate with me, I can rid you of your right of succession and grant you territory."
Clyme felt his displeasure rising. "Jokes should be kept in moderation. I did not expect for you to say such words. I will pretend that I have never heard them."
A pity. Let's go, Marquis Raven.
The man who was searchingly watching the two in silence nodded his head. Not much was known about Marquis Raven. Although he had drawn a clear line between Clyme and himself, his eyes were slightly different than the other nobles. Renaer also did not give any specific instructions on how to treat Raven.
"Ah, I almost forgot. Marquis Raven also shares my opinion and thinks of her as a monster. No, you could say that we are in complete agreement on this matter."
"Your Highness."
"Just one more word, Marquis Raven. Listen, Clyme. If you were a bigot, then I wouldn't have even bothered to say anything. But I'm giving you a warning, since she could be tricking you. She's a monster."
"Your Highness, though it may be presumptuous of me, allow me a question. What part of Lady Renaer makes you feel she is a monster? There is no one else who cares more about this kingdom and its people."
"Almost all of her efforts end up as nothing. Her actions are too pointless. At the beginning, I thought maybe it was because her preparations were lacking. Then the idea came up during a conversation with the Marquis here. What if everything was calculated? That would tie all the loose ends together. If that were true, it would mean that a girl who lives half her life inside a palace has almost no connections to the nobles, is controlling them as she sees fit. What do you call that, if not a monster?"
"It's a simple misunderstanding. Lady Renaer is not that type of person."
Clyme was certain. Those tears were not lies. That girl called Renaer was selfless and kind. He, whose life was saved by her, knew this for a fact. But his words did not reach the prince. He showed a bitter smile and walked away from Clyme, with Marquis Raven following behind him. Clyme muttered in the empty hallway,
"Lady Renaer is the most benevolent person in the world. My existence is proof. If
He swallowed those last words. Even so, they continued in his heart.
If Lady Rhaenyra ruled this kingdom, it would become a great nation that stood by its people.
Of course, considering the line of succession, it was an impossible wish. Regardless, Climb could not give it up. Lower Fire Month, 9th month, Day 3, 8:11. At last, Climb arrived in front of the room in the palace that he frequented the most. Having checked his surroundings several times over, he boldly turned the doorknob. Not knocking was absurd, but this was exactly what his master wished for. She refused to listen, no matter how much Climb opposed it. In the end, Climb was the one who relented. It couldn't be helped that a girl's tears put him at a disadvantage. Although, with that said, he managed to establish a few conditions. No matter what she said, he could not enter without knocking in the presence of the king. It was also true that entering without knocking was the source of great stress for Climb. Needless to say, every time he opened the door, Climb felt that there was no way something like this would be permitted. As he was about to fling the door open, his hand stopped at the sound of a heated discussion that was flowing through the small crack. He heard two voices, both female. The reason he stopped was because one of the voices sounded so absorbed in the discussion that it failed to notice Climb's presence, albeit he was outside the room. He did not want to throw cold water over her enthusiasm. Climb stood still and focused his ears on the voices coming from the room. Although he felt guilty about eavesdropping, he would feel even more guilty if he interrupted such a heated talk.
Say it before. Humans only focus on the profits that are in front of them. Rhaenyra, your plan about harvesting different crops on rotation, although I don't really think it would improve the yield, how long would people have to wait for the results to show? By my calculations, at the least, it should take around 6 years. Then what's the projected loss of profits for those 6 years when we cultivate different crops? It depends on the crop, but if we're at 800 now, then we'll be around 80%. So we may have a 20% loss, but after 6 years we'll be looking at a steady 30% increase in harvest. If we cultivate pastures and put us on track to raise more livestock, then we can expect even more. If it was just that last part, then everyone will jump on it. But will people agree to the constant 20% hit for those 6 years? The kingdom loans out the 20% without interest or collateral. Set up a method of payment when people start to turn a profit. If the harvest doesn't improve, don't collect. And if the harvest does increase, according to the plan, people will be able to pay everything back in 4 years. It would be difficult. Why? I told you, people only care about profits that are in front of them. There's more who prefer stability. Even if you can guarantee a 30% increase after 6 years, there's obviously going to be people who are hesitant. I don't understand. The results from the field I tested were favorable. Even if the test goes well, it still isn't absolute. Well, I didn't test it under every possible condition, so I guess it isn't. Accounting for every geological feature of the land or climate would require a large-scale experiment. Then it's going to be hard. Even not knowing if the future 30% increase is the maximum or an average is going to kill your argument. This means that you have to be able to promise a significant profit along with the profits in the short term. What if we provide the 20% free of charge for those 6 years? The rival nobility faction will be happy since the king will be losing power. But if we can secure as much goods as we give after 6 years, the national power will see an increase. Then the rival nobility's power will increase as well, while the king's power falls by 20%. The nobles in the king's faction will never agree to it. Then we ask the merchants, and... You're talking about the great merchants, right? They have their own conflicts. Carelessly lending their strength to the king's faction can affect their ability to conduct business properly with the other faction. This is too hard, Lachias. You can't get much advance work done, so your policies end up with a ton of weak spots. Well, I can understand that two massive factions make it incredibly difficult. How about just working on the issues in the palace? I don't think my brothers will allow it. Those idiot people who left their honor in their mother's womb just for you. We don't even share the same mother. My, so it is from the king's side then. Anyways, to think that even the royal family isn't close. So frustrating.
As the room became quiet, she realized that the discussion was finished.
It's okay to come in now. Right, Renaer? What?
That voice made Climb's heart thump loudly in his chest. He was astonished that she already knew he was there, and at the same time felt it was to be expected. Climb slowly opened the door.
Excuse me.
A familiar sight entered Climb's eyes. Luxurious, but not gaudy. In the room, two blonde ladies sat around a table by the windowsill. One of them was obviously the master of the room, Renaer. The girl opposite to her had green pupils and pink lips that showed a healthy gleam. Her beauty fell short of Renaer's, but overflowed with a different charm. If Renaer was the brilliance of a jewel, then she was the brilliance of life. Lacaeus Alvaen Dale Aindra. Although you would not think it from her light pink dress, she was the leader of one of only two adamantite rank adventurer teams in the kingdom, as well as Renaer's closest friend. At 19 years old, what allowed her to achieve the countless achievements necessary to rise to such a difficult position was her overflowing talent. Climb felt the tiniest traces of envy ooze out of his heart.
I hope you are well, Lady Renaer, Lady Aindra. Hello, Climb.
Hello. As Climb finished his greeting and was about to move to his designated spot, to Renaer's right, just behind her, he was interrupted.
Climb, not there, over here.
The place Renaer was pointing was the chair to her right. Climb thought it was odd. There were 5 chairs placed around the circular table, the same as always, but there were 3 teacups laid out in total. One in front of Renaer, Lacaeus, and next to Lacaeus, a seat different from where Renaer was pointing. He looked around, but could not find the third person anywhere. Even as he thought it was strange, he turned his eyes to the chair. The discourtesy of sharing a table with his master, royalty at that, the order to enter the room without knocking, or in Renaer's words, a request, almost all of Renaer's orders placed a burden on his conscience.
But...
Climb turned his eyes to the other girl, seeking help. His wordless plea to the other companion to please spare him was immediately shot down.
I don't mind. That's... Lady Aindra...
Like I've told you already,
call me Lacaeus.
Lacaeus slightly peered over at Renaer and continued.
Climb is special, after all. Angry.
Renaer smiled as she spoke. The sweet tone of Lacaeus's words seemed to end in a heart mark. Rather, it was difficult to call her expression a smile, where only her lips moved while her eyes were serious.
Lady Aindra, you should stop with the jokes.
All right. Climb really is stubborn.
How about trying to learn from her? Huh? A joke?
Seeing Renaer surprised, Lacaeus stopped abruptly and heaved a very large sigh.
Isn't it obvious? It's true that Climb is special, but only because he's yours.
Renaer blushed slightly and covered both her cheeks with her hands. Climb awkwardly looked away from her, and his eyes immediately opened wide. As if melting out of the darkness in the corner of the room was a person bent over on one knee. Dressed in a tight black suit, it was a woman who didn't fit with the room's atmosphere.
What?
Shocked, Climb lowered his body, grabbed the sword, fastened to his waist, and moved to protect Renaer. Lacaeus let out another sigh.
Climb got surprised because you're like that.
Her calm voice did not contain any caution or sense of crisis. Having understood what that meant, Climb felt the tension leave his shoulders.
Understood, boss.
The girl sitting in the shadows hopped up in a single breath.
Ah, Climb, you don't know her. This is our team member, Miss Tina.
Renaer finished Lachias's sentence. As far as Climb knew, the adamantite-ranked adventurer team Blue Rose was composed of 5 women. The leader, the faith-based magic caster Lachias, warrior Gargaron, magic caster Evil Eye, and Tia and Tina, who were trained in thief skills. Climb had already met Lachias, Gargaron, and Evil Eye, but was unacquainted with the last 2.
This person is icy. She really is like the rumors say.
With slender limbs and an appearance covered by the clothes that wrapped tightly around her body, she really did look like someone who would train in thief skills.
I apologize for my rudeness. Nice to meet you. My name is Climb.
Climb bowed his head low to Tina.
Don't worry about it.
She answered Climb's apology with a wave of her hand, and, completely silent, like a wild animal, she approached the table with smooth movements. She sat in the chair that was next to Lachias, so the teacup from before must have been hers. Even while the number of teacups on the table meant that it was impossible, Climb looked around the table once more, carefully checking for the other girl, whom he wasn't acquainted with. Lachias saw what Climb was doing and opened her mouth, as if she immediately understood him.
Tia didn't come. Gargaron and Evil Eye both said that they hate formal stuff. This isn't even that formal, though. I dressed up just in case, but it's not like I pushed the others to dress up too.
Despite what Lachias said, her type of attire was the correct etiquette when appearing before the princess, but Climb had no intention of telling this to a person who was both Renaer's friend and a distinguished noble.
It seems that's the case, but I'm grateful to meet the famous Lady Tina. I look forward to your guidance. Why don't you continue your talk after you sit, Climb?
Renaer drew out a new cup and poured as she spoke. The tea from the magic item warm bottle gave off steam, as if it was just freshly brewed. It was one of Renaer's prized possessions that had the effect of maintaining the temperature and quality of the beverage inside for 1 hour. She used it quite liberally when receiving a particularly important guest, and rarely brought it out otherwise. With no way to refuse, Climb resigned himself and sat in his seat, drinking a sip of the tea.
It's delicious, Lady Renaer.
Renaer smiled sweetly, but honestly speaking, Climb had no clue as to whether or not it was good, only that something brewed by Renaer could only be delicious. That was when suddenly he heard a flat, emotionless voice.
Tia should be collecting information today. The 3 of us were supposed to visit the palace today, but our evil boss suddenly ordered us to take a job. Everything is the evil boss's fault.
Needless to say, it was Tina's voice. Climb averted his eyes away from Lachias's frightening smile and asked,
I see. Should there be an opportunity next time, I would like to meet her at least once. Climb, Tina and Tia are twins. Even the length of their hair is similar. So even if you just see one of them, that's no problem. You've seen them both.
Although whether or not there would be a problem wasn't the issue, Climb showed that he understood. Nevertheless, Climb felt embarrassed by Tina's merciless gaze. As he was about to ignore it, the thought that she could have spotted something that he was lacking prompted him to ready himself and ask a question.
What is it? Too big. What?
He didn't know what she was talking about. As countless question marks floated above Climb's head, Lachias apologetically intervened.
It's nothing. She's just talking to herself. Don't worry about it, Climb. No, really, don't worry about it. I'm serious.
Yes.
What is she talking about, Lachias?
Although Climb was forcing himself to agree, a confused Renaer interfered. Lachias watched Renaer with a sour expression.
Really, you... Whenever it's about Climb... I meant... Shut up, Tina. The reason I didn't bring Tia was because she was going to say something strange to Renaer. Can you understand that and stop talking?
Got it.
evil boss.
Lachias, what was she going to tell me?
Lachias's face turned stiff at Renaer's interrogation. She even looked like she was suffering. As Climb thought about whether to intervene, Lachias quickly turned her eyes.
Climb, you're using that armor.
Yes, it's incredible armor. Thank you.
Although it was a forced change of topic, as to not embarrass the guests, Climb responded and moved his hand to the white full-plate armor that he had received from Renaer. Forged with a great amount of mithril, with a bit of orichalcum, the armor had various magical enchantments on it that made it surprisingly light, tough, and easy to move in. The mithril for forging the splendid armor was provided by the members of Blue Rose. No matter how much he gave thanks, it would never be enough. As Climb was about to bow his head, Lachias stopped him.
You don't have to worry about it. We just gave you the leftovers from when we made our own mithril armor.
Even if it was just leftovers, mithril was very expensive material. One would be able to afford a mithril plate armor once he reached orichalcum rank. A mithril rank might be able to afford a mithril weapon. Only a person in the adamantite rank would be able to just give it away.
I just can't say no to Renaer, after all.
You didn't accept payment back then. I saved up my allowance.
Isn't it odd for a princess to call it an allowance?
Funds from the domain are counted separately. I wanted to make Climb's armor with my own money.
Of course you did. It's Climb's, so I'm sure you wanted to pay for it.
If you knew, then you didn't have to give it to him for free. Stupid Lachias.
Stupid? Why, you...
The sulking Renaer and grinning Lachias, the two bantered playfully. Seeing such a scene, Climb concentrated so his expressionless face would not crumble. Even the fact that he was able to witness such a kind, gentle scene was all thanks to the master who accepted him under her wing. However, he could not allow his feelings to show. Although a feeling of gratitude was fine, he could not show what lay beyond it, his strong feelings for Renaer. His love. He grabbed his feelings and suppressed them. Instead, he said the words that he had repeated countless times before.
Thank you, Lady Renaer.
His message was clear. There was a firm line drawn between them, the position of master and servant. Ever so slightly, Climb saw it, because he had watched over her for so long, the smallest trace of sadness in Renaer's smile.
Not at all. Anyhow, we've digressed. Shall we return to the main topic?
It's about the 8 Fingers. I stopped at the part where we broke into 3 of their villages for growing drugs and set fire to the fields, right?
Hearing that name, Climb's expressionless face frowned slightly. 8 Fingers, a criminal organization that operated in the dark side of the kingdom. His esteemed master was acting in order to do something about that group. As for the fields that were being burned, one could only imagine the worst-case scenario for the villages that depended on growing the drug for a living. However, the lives of those villagers were a necessary sacrifice in order to eradicate the drug that was eating away at the kingdom from the inside. If she possessed absolute authority, then any measure could have been taken, but even as the princess, she had no backing. The only option was to make the cold-hearted decision of saving whomever she could, and cut away the rest. Supposing she petitioned her father, the king, then it might have been possible for her to attack with military or political might. But as long as it was certain that 8 Fingers had ties to the nobility, there was no doubt that the information would be leaked and the evidence erased in advance. That was why Renaer chose to personally request Lachias and her party. Climb knew well that this was a dangerous move. Normally, an adventurer accepted requests through the guild, and did not acknowledge personal requests. To do so was a violation of the rules all adventurers went by. Of course, the guild could not impose punishment or expel the highest-ranked adamantite-class adventurers. Nevertheless, their reputation within the guild would suffer, and there would be negative consequences in the future. The reason that her request was accepted, despite all of this, was because Blue Rose loved the kingdom and considered Renaer their friend. Clyme felt his gratitude toward Lachias rise, the one who accepted the job, even at her own risk. Lachias decided that it was about time to bring up a certain topic. She opened the bag Tina had brought and pulled out a single parchment. It was a writing that the Blue Rose members, including Lachias, could not decipher. But if it was Renaer, who had the best brains out of everyone that Lachias knew, then perhaps something could be done with it.
We found this when we were burning the village's drugs. It seemed to be some kind of written orders, so we brought it back. Do you know what it is?
The open parchment contained symbols that were not part of any country's written language. Renaer glanced at it and replied immediately.
It's a substitution cipher.
A substitution cipher was a type of code where a word or several words together was switched for a different word or symbol. If 1 indicated A and 2 was B, then 11221 became AABBA.
That's what I think too. We looked hard for a substitution chart, but couldn't find one, unfortunately. There's a chance that it was memorized, so we captured someone who looked to be in charge. Our option here should be to ask the captive with charm magic, but as you already know, charm magic loses its effectiveness when repeatedly cast by the same person on the same target. The first time has to count. I don't want to go ahead and cast it without consulting you first. I see. The reason this message was left behind... a trap. Or is it for a different reason? Then they wouldn't have made it too difficult. Yes, I think I can crack this code pretty easily.
Lachias's eyes went wide at Renaer's words. In spite of herself, her eyes met with Tina, who sat next to her. She couldn't believe it, but on the other hand, she felt that it was to be expected.
Let's see. The first letter of the kingdom's alphabet is either the male article or female article. It should be one of the syllables, so... Wait a moment.
Renaer muttered as she stood with the parchment in hand and returned with a pen and paper. She began to write.
This code switches out one letter per symbol, so it's easy. And thank goodness that it uses the kingdom's alphabet. If it used the Empire's, or if we needed to translate it first, then it would have almost been impossible. This is... First, if you figure out just one letter, then you can just fill out the rest. Anybody could do it if he tried. No, you just make it sound easy. Wouldn't it be impossible without knowing tens of thousands of words? But this is an order written in code. The instructions won't be hidden behind a metaphor, and the chance of them using difficult words is very small. The messages are probably written clearly so that even children can understand it. That's why their scale is so large.
Lachias inwardly broke out in cold sweats. Although her friend called it simple, that was absolutely not the case.
If it's her, then it's possible. Really, her ability is ridiculous.
Every time they met, every time they spoke, she was surprised. Lachias didn't know anyone who was better fit for the term genius. In contrast to Lachias, who was trembling on the inside, Renaer lightly held out the paper in her hand.
I'm finished. It wasn't orders, though.
Various locations outside the kingdom were listed on the paper. 7 were within the kingdom's lands.
Could these be where they store the drugs? Important bases, maybe? Such important information wouldn't be written down and just left in a production facility. This seems to be bait. A bait? You mean it's a trap? No, I don't think so. Even though 8 Fingers is one organization, isn't it more like the 8 groups that make it up are cooperating with one another?
Lachias nodded her head.
Then this is probably about the other 7 groups. The organization that's in charge of drugs leaked this information on purpose so they could spin it into an advantage. So they prepared information on all the other organizations beside their own. I knew that they weren't close, but to think that it was this bad.
As an adventurer, the thought of betraying one's allies filled her with aversion.
As I thought, it'll be bad if we don't move quickly.
To her friend who was nodding her head, Lachias repeated her question.
Then what should we do about the brothel? It's a very vile place. Supposedly you can experience anything there.
Even while she said this to herself, Lachias felt her insides boil with anger.
Damn it! Trash like that only thinks about their lusts. They should all die.
Remembering the information she had received about the brothel, separate from the daughter of a noble, her adventurer side that endured all kinds of hardships raged inside of her. There was no need to ponder what anything implied. It was no doubt that countless people, regardless of gender, were murdered there for entertainment. In the past, when the slave trade still existed, brothels like that had been plentiful in the underworld, but thanks to the active role taken by her friend, the slave trade was outlawed, and those days were long gone. This was probably the last such brothel remaining in the capital, perhaps in the entire kingdom. That was why removing it wasn't a simple task. No doubt that they would be met with strong competition. It was the last depraved paradise for those with fetishes so vulgar they could never tell other people about them.
Say, Renaer, since we can't rely on the government to investigate, how about we break in there by force and raze it to the ground? There's no problem as long as we can find evidence, right? If the slave trade is running the brothel, destroying it will be huge. And depending on the evidence we find, we could deal a big blow to the nobles who are involved. You might be right, Lachias, but if we do that, it'll hurt your families, the Alvian name. That's why it's difficult. It'll be the same if we use the Blue Rose members. Though, with that said, it's impossible for Clyme to take care of it by himself. I apologize for my lack of ability.
As he bowed his head, Renaer stretched out her hand and grabbed Clyme's hand with a gentle smile.
I'm sorry, Clyme. That's not what I meant. It's the last underworld brothel in the kingdom. It's impossible for anyone to do it alone. Listen, Clyme, whom I trust the most. I know how hard you work for me, but don't do anything reckless. This is an order and not a request, understand? If anything were to happen to you...
Watching from the side, even to Lachias, who was the same gender, there was something in the eyes of the beauty, welling with tears, that moved the heart. What about Clyme? Although he desperately tried to keep his face still, the bright red cheeks said everything that needed to be said. If a bard were to give it a title, it would be The Princess and Her Knight. In the face of such an emotional scene, Lachias felt a tiny sliver of terror. Although it was impossible, if Renaer's actions were all calculated, just how much of a master schemer was... Just what am I thinking about, my good friend? It's obvious she doesn't have such a bad personality by looking at everything she's done so far. She's worked to help others. If I can't believe in someone who's earned the nickname of Golden, just who can I trust? As if she was trying to rid herself of these terrible thoughts, Lachias shook her head and spoke. Now that I remember, Tian and her friends managed to uncover the names of a number of nobles involved with Coco Doll, the leader of the slave trade. But we don't know whether or not the information is accurate, so acting on it would be jumping to conclusions. As Lachias went through the names one by one, both Renaer and Clyme reacted to one name in particular. That noble's daughter is working as my maid. What? I doubt that he planted her as a spy to watch you, but I guess there's no guarantee that she's just working as a maid for experience. Right. I should be more careful with how I handle information. You keep it in mind as well, Clyme. Then shall we discuss how to deal with the locations from the cipher? And Renaer, do you think I could borrow Clyme? I want him to tell Gargaron and the others to be ready to move immediately.